Hello everyone. My name is Ryan Robichaud. I'm the Wildlife Management Section Supervisor for Maine Fish and Wildlife. And I've been asked by Sportsmen's Association of Maine and come in and provide some updates relative to our deer habitat management or conservation and management efforts within the agency, as well as an update on our predation management program, which we operate as well. Before I get started on our deer habitat conservation and management program, I think I just wanted to articulate one point in that, and I'm guilty of the same thing myself, and that's staying hyper-focused on a singular or a particular wildlife species when we talk about land conservation. So just a reminder that, the land and the conservation efforts relative to deer habitat also benefit a myriad of other species, especially when we talk about winter shelter for deer, and the spruce fir hemlock conditions on the forest landscape, the mature forest conditions. There's dozens of wildlife species that take advantage of those habitat conditions during the course of their lifespan, and they truly number in the dozens of species, both amphibians, birds, and mammals. Next slide, please. So folks should be well aware, if they aren't, LD 404, which passed in the summer of 2021, provided funding opportunities and authorization for the department to acquire and manage deer wintering habitat or deer habitat in general. The legislation required land to be managed and acquired under this to be managed specifically for the purpose of deer habitat. It increased the emphasis of deer habitat conservation through Land for Maine's Future Board, and also created funding allocations through the sale of antlerless deer permits to help fund the conservation efforts as well. In addition to the state level funding, the department has opportunities to access federal aid dollars through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we currently have an agreement with them to use these state funding sources as match to the federal dollars. And I think David was pretty clear in articulating that this does it provides a lot of opportunity to match much more federal dollars than we bring for state dollars. It's about a 25%, 75% state and federal funding split. Next slide, please. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on our deer acquisition, conservation, and management efforts. And we've transitioned from pure acquisition since we've acquired some lands to a combination of acquisition and subsequent management and stewardship of lands. Shortly after the legislation passed, we updated our deer wintering area acquisition criteria, and there's a lot of metrics that are involved with the size of the acreage that might be within the project area, how much of that is functional habitat for deer in a wintering condition, but also summer habitat or summer range opportunities for management. We assess current and historical deer use to help drive considerations on how important has this area been for deer and their survival through the winter months. We also assess the habitat conditions, specifically the species composition, age class distribution within the areas that we have interest in. And then we also look across the landscape, how does this fit into other conservation areas or other areas of importance that we note for some of the same species and considerations. That same summer, we directed our staff in the regional offices to identify a minimum of 3 project areas that they deemed the highest priority within their geographic responsibilities. And we concurrently were hiring a new position that was created to be solely focused on deer habitat acquisition and conservation in management. So we since have hired our deer habitat biologist, a gentleman by the name of Daniel Hill, combined wildlife biologists and licensed professional foresters to help in those efforts. To roll out our efforts on acquisition of deer habitat, we first started to engage with our conservation partners, and I think there's probably been discussions or folks are well aware that conservation happens continuously throughout the state of Maine, and a lot of our conservation partners have spent years, in some instances decades, culturing relationships with private landowners, and so we wanted to both capitalize on those relationships, but also we wanted to be aware of conversations so that we didn't insert ourselves into a process that might be challenging from our partners' perspectives. And I can't stress enough that the value of those relationships in being successful in conservation efforts really requires multiple people working in the same direction, and also a willingness from the landowners to want to engage in those efforts. Good examples of those relationships have been with the Aroostook County Conservation Association and their strong advocacy for the Caribou Stream Wildlife Management Area. We also work quite closely with the Conservation Fund to help enable the McQuahawk Wildlife Management Area. We refer to it as the Reed Deadwater Project through the course of acquisition. We also began to review and assess both those internal priority areas that were identified by the department, as well as project areas or opportunities that came to the department from outside sources. To date, we've reviewed and engaged on 37 different project areas. 20 of those are continuing to be ongoing, mostly related to the timing and the landowner interest at the time that we engage. Quite a few of those conversations are like, well, this is not a deal killer, but we are interested to continue the conversation, and maybe there's opportunities on both sides down the road to pick those project areas up again. So these efforts led to the acquisition of 4 new wildlife management areas. Next slide, please. The Caribou Stream Wildlife Management Area in northern Aroostook County. You can see on the, if you can see the map, the northern red stars there. There's 2 stars because we acquired lands in 2 different towns. The McQuahawk Wildlife Management Area in southern Aroostook County over on the eastern portion of the map there. The Rangeley Wildlife Management Area in western Maine, Franklin County. And the Lexington Wildlife Management Area in Somerset County, slightly east of the Rangeley area. So there you can see they're fairly well geographically distributed, and I'd like to point out that the McQuahawk Wildlife Management Area was the single largest acquisition by the agency to date. So 6,326 acres, created a whole new management area in one fell swoop, so exciting things. The acquisition process really is driven in large part, the timing is tied back into the due diligence needs to adequately ensure that the parcel is what we think it is, and that we have our obligations met relative to the funding sources. Capacity within the department at sometimes can be a challenge to navigate through and react to the moving pieces at any one time. But more importantly, external capacity of private professionals can be a challenge in terms of the timeline that we are able to accomplish things. Specifically, surveyors and appraisers are a premium in terms of the due diligence items that we need to take advantage of. In addition to the funding opportunities, sometimes are tied to grant offers or opportunities to submit proposals. Good thing on the federal side is that we have open, ongoing 5-year grants that we can somewhat easily amend, but we need to pull together multiple different funding sources to make these projects happen. Great, thank you. So I'll talk a little bit more about the specific acquisitions. The Caribou Stream Wildlife Management Area, which was acquired in 2023. It was a combination of Land for Maine's Future funding, Pittman Robinson funding through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Deer Management Fund. We ended up acquiring 2 units, one in Washburn and one in Woodland. The initial acreage totaled 918 acres between both of the parcels, and we've subsequently brought the total acreage up to 1,073 with some other acquisitions last year. What's depicted here on the map is the Washburn unit, and I'd point out that the 5-acre outlot kind of highlighted in the middle is one of those small acquisitions that we work to acquire, mostly to reduce better cover down the road in the future. So some management considerations that have been identified in that regard. And same thing, we're conducting technical assistance and public outreach to the abutting properties that we feel would be amenable, or at least an option to help manage their properties consistent with deer habitat. So the Lexington Wildlife Management Area was acquired in 2023, 1,490 acres, and Pittman Robinson and Deer Management Funds worked to acquire that land. Public access is off the last Roundup Road on the southern end of the property. And again, this one was a particularly good acquisition from my perspective. because it's been managed in conjunction with a private landowner since the early 90s, I believe. There are portions of protection area, fish and wildlife, so PFW zone deer yards on the property, and they were more than amenable to working with the agency to conduct decent management through the course of time. So this is really set up well to help achieve our objectives. We also identified access improvements. Currently, this winter, we're clearing the right-of-way in preparation for upgrading the road for better public access and good management access as well. Moving forward, we're focused on continuing our management efforts to address access and improve habitat conditions. That'll continue to build once we improve the access from our perspective. We didn't want to put the cart before the horse, so to say. So we're looking to improve, maintain the access, make it safe, and then have more of a focus on the habitat management conditions. We're also continuing acquisition efforts and ongoing review of current project areas that we have and identification of additional opportunities. We currently have a proposal for additional staff capacity for acquisition, in part dedicated towards deer habitat efforts. And so we want to have a focused effort so that people can be more reactive in that we can drum up more interest, or not more interest, but more areas that we can work through to assess. A few lessons that I've kind of gleaned from the whole process is that it reinforces the importance of our deer wintering area surveys. So annually, through the winter months, we survey deer yards both on foot and through the air. And that really helps guide our current understanding of what's important for deer. You have to kind of take, I think, feeding sometimes steers deer to where they might not be without it. But it's important for us to continue to survey deer in a yarding wintering period for sure. And then also, we spend a lot of time and energy in the review process, so we just need to be diligent to make sure that projects, number one, are feasible, and that they're going to be valuable addition to the effort to help achieve the goal of providing high quality deer wintering habitat and areas for deer to persist on the landscape. And then I'll speak to that internal and external capacity is always a pinch point as we try to get projects done. Now I'll transition over to our predation management program, and just real quickly talk about how we operate a program through the state of Maine. The most recent iteration really was a genesis or a result of a 2008 Deer Predation Working Group, which advocated for the state assuming some responsibility for predator management relative to deer. The current iteration was implemented in 2011, if I recall correctly, in March of 2011 by the commissioner at the time, Chandler Woodcock, and was a minor allocation. I think $11,000 is what we were authorized to spend under that initial year. Subsequently, there was an expansion of funding through an allocation by the legislature, and currently the program is funded through the Deer Management Fund and registration fees collected with deer registration. So the program is focused on reducing coyote predation in and adjacent to priority deer wintering areas. It includes an early trapping component prior to winter yarding, followed up with the hunting efforts through the course of the yarding period until deer disperse or the winter ends. So the priority areas are generally those that are supporting wintering deer, and the intent is to provide effort where recreational trapping and hunting might be minimal on the landscape. So it's a way to provide additional opportunity in other parts of the state that might not see a lot of recreational pressure. The trapping component begins in mid-October, 3 days after the early fox and coyote trapping season, and continues through the end of November. The hunting program begins when there's sufficient snow to adequately provide for effective monitoring of coyotes and their interactions with deer on the landscape. And go back one. So we'll talk about this slide a little bit, and then I'll be done, I promise. So over the last several years, we've maintained a kind of a static 55 deer wintering area priority list of areas that we have on our radar. We work with 41 contractors, 19 of those are trappers, 28 of those are hunters, and there's some that do both, which is the discrepancy in the numbers. A little bit of analysis, but not a deep dive. Since 2013, we have harvested 3,884 coyotes, with an average of 312 harvested per year under all methods. And we use hounds folks as well, so they hunt with hounds, bait, and trap. And the average cost per animal works out to be $170. I would point out that I discounted the first 2 years where we got off to a slow start with the program. I've counted the years we've had those funding allocations through the legislature and the deer management fund. With that, I'd take any questions folks might have.
Yeah, I manage, along with Daniel, a social media group of 50,000 members called Maine Deer Hunters. A great presentation, by the way. We've had a bunch of questions lately about where can we find this information easily and quickly. They're especially curious about the new acquisitions of deer wintering areas.
You're curious about the what?
The newer deer wintering area acquisitions.
Yeah, that's good. We sort of held back on not advocating or advertising, these properties, in part because we're looking to roll out, and I'll probably let Tim or Nate talk about our platform, basically a platform to convey wildlife management areas and what uses and what the purpose is in a public-facing platform in a spatial data set. So that's something that we've kind of been hopeful would be a good opportunity to make sure that all of these properties are depicted on the landscape and people know how to access them.
Yeah, I can add that a little bit. So we have done some press releases as well, but part of it too is public access to these isn't always good initially, and so we're reluctant to kind of promote them as, hey, here's a place to go until we get that access sort of up to a standard where it can, people can get into those, reasonably well and safely.
Estimate on when we might get that?
Well, so I think what Ryan is alluding to is the department's app, which is, Tim can probably speak more on that in terms of the timing, but we will be rolling out a map of our WMAs on that app, which will be available pretty soon. So it'll make it easier for people to find and see where these are in the landscape.
All right.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that we immediately and automatically update the conserved lands data set, which is a public-facing set of information that people can use to update their knowledge. If you're savvy enough, you can use there's a web viewer in that platform as well. That's where like Onyx or these other apps pick up their information from. So it should come in the kind of the back end of that as well.
I'm not smart enough to figure out that.
It can be a little bit technical, so that's why we're trying to get this app off the ground and running to provide that easy access to our information.
Great.
Now, Bob, to your question, if people want to know what has been conserved with the antlerless deer permit money for deer yards, I can work with Daniel to apply that to our website so people can see where those acquisitions are. But if you're looking for a place to hunt, if you focused on just the deer yards, you're missing the boat because...
No, I think the questions are more, where's the money going?
Yeah, I think I can help with that, and we can put that, I'll work with Daniel to
But we
put
can
that
be
on
patient.
our website. But I want to mention that IFW has quite a land base of other properties where hunting is allowed. I think you're over 100,000.
140,000 or so.
140,000 acres of land that they own, so if that's what people are looking at.
No, we can definitely work with you on some focused information on how we're spending that new money. I think we had a social media blog post recently that went out through our channels just in January. So we do have some information summarized for how we've been spending this new money with the new $12 fee. All of these projects have.
And is that on the website?
It is, yeah.
Okay. I'll find it.
Just a couple of other things I wanted to mention that I think are important as we look to acquire land. Land ownership is a permanent commitment, so we take that very seriously. We're very careful about which lands we acquire, and Ryan mentioned that due diligence process. It's really important to make sure we're getting the right parcels that are a good fit for our ownership. The other things that, can be a factor or a challenge is that we can't pay more than appraised value. So we have to get an appraisal, as Ryan mentioned. In a lot of cases, the landowner is looking for, more revenue than that. So that can make, proceeding with those projects a challenge if we can't pay what they're looking for. And then any acquisition that comes to the state, it needs to have deeded public access too. And that can also be another hurdle that we have to work through. So there's a lot of factors that we have to work through as a public agency that are different from what a private citizen might have to consider when they're looking to make a sort of a private deal. So yeah, there's a lot to it, and we had a great team working on it. So lots more to come in the future.
More to come. Any other questions?
I would have go ahead, Tim.
I just want to follow up on, we have not announced it yet. Judy Commissioner just walked in, she'll probably shoot me, but we're probably within, I don't know, a couple of weeks, I'd say less than a month away from pushing that app out to the public. It's actually in the Apple App Store, loading it up right now for whatever they do. It's been submitted to them. And that will be an interactive map where you can see these wildlife management areas. And it'll actually show the access points on them. So I think it's going to be very helpful to the public and hunters. I think you'll be pretty impressed with that accessibility piece. And these, I don't think they're going to identify them as purchased with the Deer Management Fund, but they are part of our wildlife management area system. You can get the other piece of that from our website and Nate's information. But the general public's going to have, like right here in Augusta, the Garcelon was at 5,000 acres.
Yep.
And it's going to have all the access points to Garcelon right at your fingertips. So I think it's going to be very helpful.
Very nice.
Yeah, it'll also talk about what opportunities might be available at any given property, and also some, what are the restrictions, that we have for administering the lands. There was another question there. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Jane Thompson, and I'm a SAM member. I live in the town of Morrill, which is out near Belfast. If my understanding was right, the funding for the Deer Management Fund comes from deer permits, which is the antlerless program. Am I right?
Correct. And also there's a registration fee for registered deer.
When you get a tag in the deer, right? Okay. Well, I guess my comment is that the antlerless system, as it used to be, was a lottery. You got one, extra one, in addition to if you got a buck, you could get that. But now, with the multiple antlerless permits that are being made available throughout the whole season, we're seeing a real decline in our deer herd. And I know that neighboring communities are as well. And we're concerned about that. It also, am I talking too loud? I'm sorry.
No.
Because I have a little...
It's nice to hear you.
A little hearing problem. So sometimes I try. Anyway. It also, when I see emails come to me that says, we have more antlerless permits available, get some more now, it fosters some kind of wrong attitude in our younger hunters, maybe not necessarily the younger ones, but it's like, who needs 3 deer? Really, it's too much. And if each hunter who lives in a certain area now has access and can go out and get 3 deer, maybe they won't think to spread out where they're hunting from.
Yep.
We're seeing a real decline, and so that doesn't seem, when we talk about when you balance and all of that, we're taking money and deer out of some areas, and we're funneling into the
Yep.
deer wintering yard habitats
Yep.
at the expense of our deer herd.
Well, I guess a few things. I'll start with the, how we allocate the antlerless deer permit system. And that's why, those are allocated at a wildlife management district area level. And we do that to adequately collect enough biological data, mostly through the harvest, to indicate what's the health of the herd, what's their reproductivity, some other metrics that help guide our considerations through our deer management plan. So that permit allocation system is a combination of a bunch of different metrics. There's the impact on any given winter for deer mortality. There's other mortality that's considered relative to the deer herd. So permits are allocated based on biological information that we collect to the health of the deer herd within that wildlife management district. That really drives the numbers. What we've struggled with, especially in mid-coast and southern and coastal Maine for sure, is we haven't been able to reach our harvest objectives for, in some instances, many years. And so we identified this as an opportunity to, in effect, increase the harvest, to help achieve our deer management goals that are established at that wildlife management district level. And so there's that information helps guide that. I think, Jen, our game section supervisor, might have a little bit better way to articulate, that concept. But, that's where we end up allocating antlerless deer permits, is based on the harvest metrics that we see in the health of the deer herd.
Harvest metrics, is that the same thing? That's not the same thing as deer count or survey, is it?
Well, Jen, maybe you can elaborate on that question a little bit.
I think what Ryan's trying to articulate is there's a bunch of different information that goes into how we estimate abundance. And so harvest is part of that information. We have other measures like winter severity, and we use all these different pieces of information to come up with our estimates of how deer are doing in each different area. And I'm not surprised that you're seeing a reduction, because that was our intent, right? We were above or below our harvest objective and above our abundance estimates in some of these areas. And so that was our goal, was to increase harvest and have some local reduction in deer numbers. And so that's not a surprise. If it becomes the level that's concerning, then we could adjust that. And that's what the permit structure allows us to do. And that's something we evaluate every year. So we'll keep that in mind, your feedback, and continue to adapt with that.
Can I further ask a question on this deer harvest goal? How does that get determined, and what is your strategy? What are the determining factors to say some year we need this much? And if we're seeing these decreases, it's not matching up. What we're seeing, and this is just secondhand and firsthand myself information, with you're saying, but we needed to kill 1,000 more. Where are those 1,000 more? Because they're not on my land.
And so we're managing at a wildlife management district level, and I think
Yeah,
you're
on the
looking
whole
at, right, and
district.
you're looking at an
Right.
individual property. And so you might have some extra hunting pressure that's occurring in your area, and that you're seeing that. But that's not the level that we manage at. We don't manage at the property level, at the wildlife management district level. And so we have objectives for that unit.
The point that Ginny made is something that I also share, and that is the devaluing of a big game animal like white-tailed deer. And I don't know if it's happening widespread, but it does seem like I've heard an attitude change among some hunters. I had one man call me and say, I want to kill as many deer as I want, not pay $12. And I said, well, how many deer is enough for you? And he said, well, when all my family and friends have deer meat, then that's enough. So I do think that there's something to what Ginny is saying, that we also have to make sure that we educate that these are a magnificent animal. Some areas we want to bring them back because they're disappearing. In other areas we do want to reduce the herd. But I do understand what she's saying.
Yeah.
There's some people devaluing this amazing animal.
The whole hunting experience. It's like it's
I guess,
Along with all the other metrics,
Right.
that's one of them.
I guess what I would offer, I mean, I would say up and down the eastern seaboard, and that creeps up into southern and coastal Maine. White-tailed deer in general, I think, have been devalued by the broader public. You know, they're so abundant and overabundant in much of, you know, the eastern coastline that, you know, there's talk of fertility control in some places, there's sharpshooters, there's all kinds of metrics being used up and down the east coast to control white-tailed deer. And it's at a point in many places where the general public does not value deer and sees them as really a problem animal. And we're certainly sensitive to not getting to that point here in Maine, which is in part why it is important to make sure that the deer population, particularly in the southern and coastal part of the state where the habitat is really good, the winters are mild, there's a higher human density, which in many cases makes hunting more challenging, that we ensure the deer population doesn't get to the point where we're seeing vehicle collisions, Lyme disease, you know, crop damage, damage to ornamental plants, that sort of thing, that reach the point where the general public just doesn't want deer around. So that's the balance we're trying to strike, and that does require harvesting antlerless deer, harvesting does. And so the new system, it has been successful in increasing antlerless harvest. There are a few hunters that are taking multiple deer. That is the minority, though. There's very few hunters that shoot 2, 3, 4 deer a year. There's a handful. But it has allowed us to increase the harvest enough that we're more effectively managing the deer population in that part of the state and preventing it from growing to a level that's really problematic. But I absolutely hear you, and I've seen the same thing. I think, you know, anytime you speak of a big group, there's a lot of hunters in Maine. There are going to be certain hunters that, you know, I think maybe think and act and behave and communicate in a way that I'm sure the people in this room wouldn't be supportive of. We're aware of that, but at the same time, there has been a need to increase the doe harvest in particular. So I think it's something we can all work on, you know, through our networks and the hunters that we know, to make sure that that doesn't result in a decline in the value of deer to hunters. So I hear you. I think you're absolutely right. But on the flip side, we want to make sure we're maintaining appropriate deer populations so that the general public retains support for deer as well. It's a tough balance.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you all. Oh, there's one more question?
Could you address the, when deer eat and graze in places where they have put waste in the ground?
You're speaking PFAS? Yeah.
PFAS. Yep.
Thank you.
Nate,
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, yeah, PFAS and deer and turkey, that's, if there's time, Dave, I can speak to that for a couple of minutes. So, yeah, we've been putting a lot of effort into that issue. That issue really, it came onto our radar because of hunters in the Fairfield area that were kind of watching what was going on there with well water and other areas of contamination, and were curious if there was an impact in deer. It is not something that we at that time, you know, really had thought that much about. PFAS in wildlife until the last couple of years has not been something for which there's been a lot of effort dedicated towards anywhere in the world. So I think it was in fall of 2021, we sampled 8 deer in the Fairfield area just out of curiosity to see, is there an impact here? Is there any level of contamination in deer that warrants any kind of concern from a human health perspective for hunters? And we were a little bit surprised that they did come back with elevated levels that warranted an advisory to hunters. So we acted pretty conservatively and established a pretty large area, about 125 square miles. That fall recommended that hunters not consume the meat from deer they harvested in that area until we could do further testing. We followed that up in summer of 2022, summer and fall, with a pretty extensive sampling program, both in deer and in wild turkey, and thankfully found that the contamination was really very limited to those contaminated fields and immediately adjacent to those fields. And so we were able to shrink the size of that advisory to about 25 square miles. So about an 80% reduction, and confirm that as soon as you got a mile or two away from those fields, the deer are safe to eat, the turkeys are safe to eat. Since then, we've been doing sampling in some other locations, the broader Unity area and a few other locations. We found 3 additional areas for which we issued advisories this past fall. Those are about 3 square miles, 4 square miles in that range, where we're recommending hunters don't consume deer or turkey that they harvest in those areas. But really the good news is that the broader sampling that we've done across the main landscape has indicated that levels of contamination in deer and turkey that are high enough to warrant any concern for hunters is limited to fields that have extremely high levels in soil. And the radius or the distance from those fields is pretty small, like about a mile or 2. So this does not appear to be like a landscape level issue in Maine. It's really, you can almost think of these as sort of hazardous waste sites where, we're recommending no consumption of deer and turkey, but it does not appear there is this broader landscape level issue in the state. I expect we will probably have a few more areas over the next year that we issue advisories in, but we're not anticipating it's going to be, kind of a broad brush across the state or anything like that.